I don't really know where to start with this video because I don't think there's any amount of words that I could say that could make what happened in Texas and what happened in Buffalo, New York any better. My whole career has been working with family dynamics and behavioral concerns like oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder and juvenile delinquency, and just the toxicity that can exist in a family, whether it's hidden or not. And what I've learned in the course of my career is that a lot of the issues with our families, a lot of issues with our children who are growing up in families, is the disconnect. There's a disconnect between that younger generation and the parent, or that younger generation and the grandparent. And that kind of leads the child to internalize emotions, to hide, to run away, to harbor, I should say, ignorance about other people, resentment, jealousy, morbid jealousy, and even their own anger towards the world at large. Now, this is not to give this young man in Texas any leverage, or anybody like him. I really am trying to point out that the individual who engages in mass murders is usually having trouble at home and is usually struggling with some things on the inside of them. In today's video, I want to highlight the characteristics of a psychopath, and I want you to understand, and hopefully I make it very clear, that mass murders are psychopaths. There's something wrong in the brain, there's something wrong genetically, and they have the ability to go around with anger, resentment, and then use it on you. But before we jump in, let me briefly introduce myself in case you are new. My name is Tamara. I'm an internationally and board certified trauma therapist. I'm licensed in mental health, and I specialize in treating children, teens, and families, as well as adults who are dealing with trauma. Let's go ahead and jump in. Anytime there's a mass murder, which often includes between 3 to 4 people who are murdered at the same time, that's the definition of a mass murder. It's 3 to 4 and up individuals who have been murdered. One of the things I've learned about this kind of a situation in these murderers is that there's psychopathy at the core of who they are. Now, psychopaths are practically born and made. So there's a debate that says the psychopaths are born and the other side says they're made. And so, some people go in the middle and they're neutral and they say, you know what, it's both things. And that's kind of where I'm coming from in this video, that it's a little bit in the middle, and it's terrifying. And most of the field of criminal law and even psychology, those of us who study human behavior, we've been befuddled by this kind of behavior. And especially when you look at the 19 beautiful children who have been flashed across the screen, and all you see is that they are no longer here. They are dead. They are deceased. They have transcended into another space, and that is heartbreaking. Who would think that an individual would see it okay to take a gun and military weapons that he got somehow and go into a school and murder? It's the most terrifying thing to think about. And I think a lot of people are perplexed. Now, I want to highlight that there are certain characteristics of the mass murderer that we need to be aware of, and they often have 1 to 2 ways that they operate in the world. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the organized and disorganized mass murder. Now, the disorganized mass murder is usually impulsive. They don't have any forethought. It's not premeditated. It is, I am angry, I'm resentful, I am jealous, and I'm going to grab my gun and go back to the grocery store, go back to the high school I went to, go back to the college, and I'm going to kill as many people as I want. I haven't thought about it. I haven't processed it. I haven't thought about the consequences. I just feel impulsively ready to murder. Now, the organized, planned type of mass murder is when the individual goes home, maps out this whole plan. He knows what door he's going to go through. He knows what professional may be in the way or not in the way. So this young man who went into the school and killed 19 children and 2 teachers, he probably knew, because his mom worked there, I believe, which door to go through. He was probably also well aware of the fact that they didn't have really good metal detectors. They didn't have security. So all of this was premeditated. We call it pseudo-commando. Pseudo-commando. Here it is right here on the screen. And it's really just having knowledge and having arsenal, for lack of a better word. And it's knowing how to maneuver things in a way that is going to end tragically. So that is planned. Okay, so disorganized and organized. You want to keep that in mind. There are also different kinds of characteristics that mass murderers have. And one of the things that they have is frustration intolerance. They are intolerant to any kind of frustration, a bad score on a test, a expulsion from school, being expelled, a breakup, a divorce, being fired, right? They have a low level of frustration tolerance. Whereas our frustration tolerance may be up to here, right? We have to be aggravated and we elevate and we get to the boiling point and we explode. But for somebody who has low frustration tolerance, they're usually from here to there in a matter of seconds. And so it's from 0 to 100. And that is most likely what has happened here as well. Now, I am of the firm belief that this young man planned the entire attack. And so that is the number one symptom of psychopathy. There's no empathy involved in the thought process. There's no agony or distress for having the thoughts. There is no remorse. There's no anything. There's no emotion. It's, I'm thinking of A to do, I'm thinking of B to do, and my goal is C. And that is how the psychopath thinks. Now, the next characteristic is externalization and blame. And what I mean by that is that instead of going within themselves to figure out what is wrong, instead of going inside of their mind and inspecting what they think and feel, they externalize that anger. And so it builds and it builds and it builds. And instead of digesting that, for lack of a clinical way of explaining, and working with it in therapy or with himself or whatever, they externalize it. And so the behaviors become externalized through mass murders, through gun violence, knife stabbings, the list goes on. Now, most mass murderers have a long list of reasons that are distorted and unhealthy that causes them to blame other people. And so you're likely to see this a lot in mass murders. They blame, that's what they do. This is how they exist. And most of the time they have what are known as revenge fantasies. And it's really taking what you feel as the mass murderer is a slight to you, or a rejection, or a minimization, and you take all of those negative feelings and you fantasize about how you're going to get revenge. You also fantasize about how you're going to maneuver the situation to get what you want, which is often death and murder of over 4 people, because that's what a mass murder is. So revenge fantasies, or the victim mentality, is typically what causes the issue here. Now, the next characteristic that you're likely to see in a mass murder is fascination with gun violence and weapons, right? Dark themes. They are engaged in that because it meets them where they are. And we can't say that this is true for everybody. We also can't say that this is true for all mass murders. But what I am pointing out here is there's often a fascination, or fantasy, I'm trying to say, around guns and having control. Now, just think about it. If you're dealing with an individual who is a narcissist, a psychopath, a sociopath, right? If they have what's known as the dark triad traits, I talk about that right up here in this video if you want to go check that out. But the dark triad traits are narcissism, machiavellianism, I always struggle with that word, it's huge, here it is on the screen, and psychopathy. Now, these are dark triad traits. These are traits that work together within an individual. Well, you have somebody that has dark triad traits and they don't have anybody on the outside of them and on the outside of their thought processes to help them or to talk to them. So what do? They go within and they start thinking and processing and planning and getting more and more angry. And some people have written manifestos. You know, they have these long journal entries of things that they feel have harmed them and slights that they've experienced. And so tuning into this set of dark triad traits really includes or is triggered by engaging in watching movies of violence, listening to music, looking at artwork that's dark and evil, and really lacking in empathy, connecting with other people online who have a victim mentality or they have some kind of fascination with violence. All of these things are triggers for a mass murderer. Now, can we look at an individual and claim this is how, they're going to behave because we see certain things in them? Absolutely not. It is not easy for those of us, even myself, who has had a lot of experience in psychology and crime, and law. I can't even say that I would even know what to look for. Now, what I would look for, I think, would be the dark triad traits. I would look for, psychopathy, sociopathy. I would look for a history of trauma. I would look for family dynamics. But in terms of really just pointing out somebody in a crowd to determine if they're a mass murderer, that's almost impossible. The next thing that you are likely to see is possessions of weapons and arsenal. Most households that have guns, an arsenal, and, weapons, hunting knives, the list goes on, we can't judge them per se, but what we can say is if there's some kind of embracing of these things and it's praised and elevated, and sometimes even if the individual has gotten some kind of ego boost or charge by using the weapons, it is likely that these individuals will end up becoming mass murderers because they are comfortable with pulling a trigger. They're comfortable with cocking a gun. They're comfortable with really having this mentality that it's me against you, right? I don't know if you guys watched my previous video on groupthink. Go ahead and check that out right up here. But it's this mentality of we against you and us against you, right? And so if you have possession of weapons and arsenal and you praise that and you're not using it strictly for protection, you're using it for power and glory, most likely you're probably going to use it in a mass murder. And most mass murderers have Adam Lanza, James Holmes, and the two incidents that we just had recently in Texas and in Buffalo, New York. These are individuals who lived in a household full of guns. And that's not the issue. So please don't misunderstand. The issue is they're comfortable with the weapons. The issue is that they took the luxury of having the weapons for safety to a whole other level. And so that's the issue. The next thing is normalization of crime and violence. I had a situation maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and I'm just going to be honest here. The kid scared me. He was 12 years old. He wrote a huge journal manifesto. I ended up having to call the police and work very closely with them and trying to get this child the help he needed. He had 12 guns in the home, pistols, rifles. He had several hunting knives. He would kill animals in the backyard. He hunted for animals. He would trap birds. He would cut bugs apart. He was very angry and very violent. And he wrote a huge manifesto in detail of how many kids in the school that I worked in he was going to murder. And the list was longer than I've ever seen before. And it had the names of the kids in school that he was going to murder. And I think the only reason why that didn't turn into a mass murder is that he had a therapist that knew what she was doing at the time. I connected with the police. We talked to the school and we took every precaution, that we could to make sure that nothing ever happened. And this kid ended up getting sent away to a residential treatment facility. God only knows where he is today. So if they grew up in a home where there's domestic violence, abuse, trauma, traumatic bonding, all of those things, violence and crime is likely to follow. Now, we also want to think about paranoia and mood dysregulation. We don't know, because he ended up dead in this most recent attack in Texas. We don't know if he was delusional. He most likely was. And if police can find any documentation, that would be great, because a psychoanalysis is needed. You know, a psychologist, a therapist, a forensic psychologist who deals with psychology of crime and law can look at those entries in letters or whatever and really kind of pick it apart to see where he was. Before I mention the risk factors to becoming a mass murderer, let me just say that, you know, this is a situation that we are going to have again in the future. I think the number one issue here with this entire thing is that we have to get smarter. Because, you know, once the issue in Buffalo, New York happened, I think we needed to be a little bit smarter in terms of protecting our children and our families in different states. It's almost as if, and I'm not placing blame, so I want to make sure that you're not taking it this way. I'm just saying, I think mass murders happen, and after the fact, we're so distraught that we move on to the next thing and the next thing. And then before you know it, here's another mass murderer who's thinking up to do something really evil and dark. So I think we need to learn from all of these experiences, because mass murders in the United States are not going to go away. We have over decades of data that shows one particular group of individuals who have engaged in mass murders. Now, over recent years, there may have been Hispanic children or teens or adults and Mexican and African American and so forth, but we have a long history of Caucasian males as being the ones who execute these mass murders, and there is no research right now that tells us why. So we're kind of stuck. We need more research there, and we also need to again become more knowledgeable about mass murders and what they look like. Now, there are risk factors to, you know, individuals who are mass murderers. And I'm going to say one of the most important things is gender. It's always a male. It's hardly ever a female. And it's often a white male who is open to weapons and has access to weapons. So we don't have a history in the United States where we have mass murderers who are women. There may be a few exceptions here and there, but that is not what our research is showing us. It's usually white males or Caucasian males. Mental health is also something that's important to keep in mind. Now, you know, just because mental illness is often at the core of people who sometimes are very angry and have emotion dysregulation doesn't mean that mental illness is present in a mass murderer. But we also can't minimize that possibility because there could be some mental illness, you know, components or pieces to this: schizophrenia, delusions, hallucinations, paranoia, right? I'm hearing things and seeing things that are not really there. So we have to keep that in mind. Dark personality traits, the dark triad traits. If you go back and watch that video, you know, I give you a little bit of information of what they look like, so that may be helpful. The next thing is easy access to guns. That's another risk factor. Fascination and normalization of weapons. That's another risk factor. Internalization of emotions. So you don't know how to talk and engage and get the help that you need, so you internalize your emotions. That's another risk factor. And history of aggression, juvenile delinquency, problematic family relationships. Growing up in a house with domestic violence, hearing it, witnessing it, being sexually assaulted or molested for many years. These are all risk factors that makes it a little easier for the individual to lean towards a certain way of thinking and behaving in life. Risk factors are things that makes it difficult for us to overcome certain things. If we have too many risk factors, we're likely to go down the wrong road. Protective factors protects us, right? If we have a healthy school relationship, if we have healthy and significant adults in our life to give us encouragement and strength, if we have healthy mental health, if we talk about emotions at home or in school, if we have access to money, food, clothing, and other necessities, those are all protective factors. We have an opportunity to go to college, right? We have an opportunity to get a good job. Those are all protective factors, and those are the things that protects us from leaning towards the bad things in life. But when you have very little of those and you have more of these, then it's a lot easier to lean towards doing something you're going to regret. This is a difficult topic, guys. Let me know in the comment section below how you feel about all of this. Talk to me about what you think about the weapons. Talk to me about, the mental health piece of this. Talk to me about your anger and resentment over this. And do you think we're missing something? I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being with me in today's video. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and hit that bell and subscribe button if this video was helpful. I will see you in the next video. I'm most likely going to be live on Wednesday, so stick around. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.